So Mike Hutchinson has been a longtime leader in education and a community activist in Oakland. He's a school board member for District 5. He's the founder of OPEN, that's Oakland Public Education Network, and is currently one of the leaders in the fight against school closures. Hillary Chen is a community and anti-racist activist involved in the Oakland Education Association, East Bay DSA, and Action 2020. She is currently teaching at Parker Elementary School in East Oakland, one of my alma maters, and one of the schools targeted to be closed this year. And Jack Kersten is a retired Oakland teacher who writes and analyzes on issues related to education, politics, public health, and the pandemic. Before retiring, he was on the executive board and bargaining team of the Oakland Teachers Union, the OEA, and among other things, helped to organize OEA's campaign to bail out schools, not banks, and end foreclosures, and also the Occupy Oakland Education Committee's 18-day occupation of Lakeview Elementary School in 2012. So I'm not absolutely sure. Was it Jack or Hillary? One of you want to go first?
Maybe I should go first. I'm just going to give historical background. And is that okay, Hillary, if I do that?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay. I mean, it seems to me it's a better order because, I mean, I offered to give more time to Mike and Hillary. I'm teaching in Alameda, at Alameda High School, actually. I retired from Oakland almost 12 years ago, and I'm almost 76, and it takes all the energy that I have, you know, to teach. I came back this spring because they're short a math teacher, and I'm trying to help out because I don't think over 100 students should go without a teacher, but boy, it really takes a lot of energy at 76. But I want to, you know, begin in terms of the history by going back, way back 50 years to 1970, early 1970s, the end of the post-war boom, and there was a euro-dollar crisis some people may know of. The U.S. the world went off the Bretton Woods standard, and many economists said, and I think that more thought, that the world was liable to be plunged back into the conditions of the 1930s. It was only a quarter of a century since the end of World War II, and people thought we may be going back into the Great Depression. And the response of big capital in the US was to attack the working class, especially through austerity, especially through going after the public sector. And in the public sector, the area that they went after first in their trial, thrust in 1971, 72, 73, was education. And the place they did that was in New York, where they sent, under the auspices of the Ford Foundation, then the big liberal corporate funding non-profiteer group, they sent teams into a couple of junior high schools in Manhattan to try to prove that teachers didn't need preparation time, that they could have their preparation time cut in half without hurting students. And furthermore, class size could be increased without hurting students. So increased class size and decreased preparation time had no effect on student performance, according to them. This campaign, sponsored by the Ford Foundation and partly funded by them, was backed by, I believe it was the Economic Development Corporation in New York, who put out glossy pamphlets blaming the public sector for the crisis of profitability in the private sector, which was strangling the economy and it had to be cut back. This included the biggest capitalists in the country, the heads of Chase Bank, Citibank, AT&T, then it was Esso and Texas and Mobil, now Exxon, and and various others. New York Life, Metropolitan Life. I remember the names of various of them, Walter Wriston, and who was from Citibank, and Rockefeller from Chase Manhattan, and various of the other, George Shinn from New York Life. That campaign didn't really succeed in pushing things back immediately. But what it led to 2 years later, or it was a tributary to, was the attempt to throw New York and the working class nationally back decades, if not a century. If people may have heard of the New York City fiscal crisis of 1975, when the bankers came out from behind their desks to run the city through the Emergency Financial Control Board, which took over emergency powers after they refused to renew loans to the city. The Secretary of the Treasury for the US, William Simon, Republican, not only refused to help the city out, but said that we're going to teach the city a lesson so that no city attempts to go where this one did. And where that was providing decent services, or at least a modicum of services, and education to working and poor people. This has been called the dress rehearsal for neoliberalism, and it was one of the big salvos opening neoliberal, essentially austerity, what's been called structural adjustment, the attempt to cut back on the working class globally and nationally by cutting services and taking from the working class and pumping to corporations and wealthy individuals. So school closures, I think, should be seen in that context, because not long thereafter, in the early 1980s, January 1982, was it not January 2? I think so. Anyway, the Nation at Risk. There was a Nation at Risk put out by the Reagan administration, which said that the U.S. was failing in education, and that there had to be drastic changes made to the U.S. public education system, because the country's economy, people, and defense were being put at risk by the level of education, which was falling behind other countries. In fact, what was falling behind other countries was the education for those at the bottom, lowest income, especially Black and brown people. In high poverty communities, the results on the various international tests were very low, very lagging, and it was an indication of the state of education and what was not invested in the general racism of the society. In the more affluent communities, even not even only upper middle class, but middle class communities, the US was 1 or 2 in the world. So what you had was a function of class and race, and the remedies that were put in, and the groups who attempt to remedy it, were again the biggest players in the capitalist world in the U.S. The Business Roundtable came in to impose standards state by state. This led eventually it led eventually to No Child Left Behind, which I'll touch on in a minute, in the first years of the second of Bush the second's administration in 2002. But in the late 1990s, a group of many relatively new billionaires with a few old ones came into education. Bill Gates and Eli Broad prominent among them, and for Oakland, those were the two most important names. There were also the Walton family from Walmart, and the Fishers, Donald and Doris, whose son John is now, prominent in in KIPP and other charter schools, and in the A's ballpark attempt at Howard Terminal. But Eli Broad and Bill Gates came in, and Oakland went into their crosshairs. In 2003, and I can't go into everything in detail of how the state takeover occurred, but when the state takeover, maybe we can have the discussion. But when the state takeover occurred in January of 2003, Oakland Mayor Jerry Brown and State Commissioner of Public Instruction Jack O'Connell asked Los Angeles billionaire Eli Broad to select and handpick the state administrator for Oakland, and he picked Randolph Ward, who was in Eli Broad's Urban Superintendent Academy. Now, Eli Broad's philosophy was bottom line, completely bottom line oriented, that schools were profit centers, school districts should be run like large corporations from the top down. He said it was insane to try to run them from the bottom up. And to try to run anything democratically, and students were revenue sources. The No Child Left Behind legislation was very heavily weighted towards punishing schools in high poverty areas because it went very heavily on high stakes standardized tests, and which of course students in those areas going to schools that were under-resourced, and many of the students, when I taught at Castlemont High School, one of those schools in East Oakland, many students lived in group homes, had very little access to libraries, and so on. So you all know the kind of handicaps for a high stakes test that the students go through who live in high poverty areas. Those schools, there was 7 different ways, I think, in No Child Left Behind that schools could be reorganized, could be punished. And heavily among them were closing the school down, and reassigning, dispersing the teachers to other schools, or closing the school down entirely in favor of opening charter schools. Now, Bill Gates, who Bill Gates Foundation co-ran Oakland under the first few years of the state takeover with the Eli Broad Foundation. They actually ran the school district under Randy Ward. Gates in 2002 had started a small school initiative to break up secondary schools into smaller schools. The idea being that simply breaking them up, the act of creating smaller schools, would create a quote unquote small school miracle, which did not require more resources. And in fact, many of the schools were denied resources. At Castlemont, where I taught, the result, Castlemont was broken into 3 small schools, plus a charter school was thrown into the middle of the campus. The library, which was a great library, was closed. The shops, the Construction Academy, the Fashion Academy, and the Culinary Academy, which provided jobs to teenagers graduating high school in an area and a time when it was extremely difficult for students to get jobs in East Oakland, especially Black students, and Castlemont was majority Black. They were all closed down despite the fact that they were self-funding and award-winning. So we said at the time that what you're going to do is make things worse by closing them down, and then when you put them back together, you'll make them worse again. That was part of a program where more than half the schools in Oakland were either closed or reorganized. And we actually went through this during preparation for the fact-finding hearing with the State Public Employee Relations Board in 2010. And when I was on the OEA bargaining team. And we found that more than half of them had either been reorganized or closed. After the state takeover ended in the end of 2009, under the new superintendent, Tony Smith, still more schools were closed, which led to the sit-in we had at Lakeview Elementary for 18 days in June and July of 2012. So the plan there is, I think that the plan is one, the simplest level is austerity. It's to squeeze from the top. If you look at this globally, the school boards always come to teachers, staff, parents, and say, we're turning our pockets inside out and we have no money. So we have to close schools because it'll save money. A, closing the schools doesn't save money usually. B, where has the money gone? Under the state takeover, there was a $37 million deficit when the state took over, and 6 years later, when it left, they had tripled it to $111 million, despite the fact that they closed schools, shut down programs, laid off teachers, and still more disproportionately laid off other, clerical and other staff. So where did the money go? Well, the money went to high priced consultants who they bring in with an almost bottomless cup to feed the consultants, and those that don't get those contracts, they put on six-figure administrative contracts. So Oakland had then double per capita the administrative overhead of the average California school district, and double the per capita spending on consultants. Since that time, I understand it's and we looked into this a little bit 3 years ago, and I think it's gone up even more then. It's gone up, it's more than triple, at least it was 3 years ago. So money has been thrown out, money that could be used to really reorganize and provide the kind of schools that students need. Because let's face it, we don't really want to go back to the status quo that we had in 2003. I didn't like the slogan of defend public education because we need something much better. But the fact is that defending that would have given us something, if we could have, a lot better than what we have now. So we have to not just defend, but also fight forward. And I think that there's the squandering of money from the school district. Secondly, there's $100 million debt to the state, and that debt should be excused. The state alone ran up the debt $74 million. If you add the interest on that, it's well over $100 million. And there's far less than that that's outstanding now. And that should be excused, and it should be simple to excuse it because our friends, the Democrats, are in control in Sacramento. Only maybe they're not such friends. The final thing is that wealthy corporations make out like a bandit in Oakland, and they should be made to pay. And we tried to do that with a bank campaign when I was in OEA. Craig Gordon, I think, is present here, and he was participating in that too. And I know maybe we can talk about that later. But I also want to say that the school closure, in terms of how many schools should be open, that should be something that should be democratically decided by the people of Oakland. How many schools are needed and how they should be organized so that students have neighborhood schools, so that neighborhoods have schools which are anchors. It's one of the stable institutions in areas where, frequently are very unstable, and schools provide stability. It was certainly true at Castlemont High School. And the school shutdowns, the way they're doing them, always the way the school does them, has been making things more unstable. closing down neighborhood schools, schools which have been institutions for years, and that needs to be stopped in this track. I want to say something else. Another reason for the school shutdowns and also the austerity, there are two reasons in addition to just the general austerity that I want to point to, and one of them is closing down schools makes them plums for selling off to developers who are very interested in grabbing these properties.
That's
I can
right.
give you examples. There isn't time, but this was a big thing. It was written into the legislation from the state in 2003, that the enabling legislation for taking over the Oakland School District. There was one parcel that the state administrator had control over. It was the central parcel with 5 schools and the administration building fronting Lake Merritt. They really wanted to unload that. Fortunately, there was a city street running through it, and we were able to get the city council to block that. And the other reason is because teacher unions, the largest unions, the National Education Association, which OEA is affiliated with, is the largest union in the country. And teacher unions, which I have many criticisms of the way they're run from, at national and state levels, but nevertheless, they present an obstacle, to the plans to squeeze out, education and squeeze working people, the people who work in the schools, the people who send their kids to the schools, the communities that benefit from them. So I think that putting this, and also by squeezing teacher unions, you clobber what's left of was once vibrant trade union movement. The private sector unions have been very hard hit, and the public sector unions, the largest of them are the teacher unions, and if they could be throttled, then the working class will be in much worse shape. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jack. Let's next go to Hillary, and then followed by Michael.
Hi, I'm Hillary. I am a teacher at Parker, which is now a K-8 school. Thanks to Gary Yee, we added a middle school a few years back. So it's actually my first year teaching. I was an engineer before, and this is definitely different. So I'm gonna probably give more of an anecdotal kind of background to what's happening. So I started at Parker about 2 weeks into the school year, and my first day there, a teacher had already left. And this kind of just gave a clear indication of what was going to happen and what kind of school this was. It's just been a very highly underfunded, under-resourced school in a gentrifying neighborhood. So I actually live a couple blocks from Parker, and it's crazy to see just the amount of push out that is happening in this neighborhood. So my year here, over 10 staff members have left before the end of the school year. Vacancies that just not all of them have been filled, combined with behavioral issues and academic issues due to COVID, where kids lost basically a year of school. It's just been a rather difficult school to be at, both for staff and families and students. And I don't blame any of these staff members for leaving. It's a tough situation. It's not just kind of like the school, it's also OUSD in general is just not providing a very good, safe place to work. And there's also, of course, like just the lack of parent involvement. There was a point where our school just didn't even allow parents on campus due to some issues. And then just due to like the enrollment as well, the school, the way that they do enrollment in OUSD, the school has like just been dropping in enrollment every few years by like 100 students, 200 students. COVID obviously didn't help the situation. So back in January, we found out that Parker was going to close. We had a meeting with our network superintendent, Mr. Leroy Gaines, who some of you remember also ran for school board and got that nice promotion after he lost. So bringing it up to the students, I was a little bit nervous. Students are always telling me, I hate the school, I hate school in general, which due to many reasons, like obviously the school system is not providing for them in the way they need. Obviously society in general just isn't. But I was actually pretty surprised. They were extremely sad about it. They were scared, they were nervous of going to a new school. And at the same time, it was also this sort of resignation of just constantly being pushed out and kind of like just coming to terms with like, oh yeah, of course they're pushing us out. Like, I guess I'll just go to a school the next year. But one thing that did come out of it was our staff became extremely militant suddenly. The school was not a union school when I started. We had no site rep. There are teachers who had been there for 10, 20 years and had never done a strike in their life throughout Ousd. And suddenly staff members were going to board meetings for the first time. They were staying until 2 a.m. at these board meetings. And we ended up doing 2 wildcat strikes. One before the school board meeting where they finally voted on what schools to close, which we did with some other schools that were also on the list of closure. And then one during this ILWU rally, where ILWU members walked out of the port in order to protest the privatization of both the port and against school closures. And in terms of like the impact that we're going through now, students are now being transferred to what they call welcoming schools through an opportunity ticket, where they're being told by the district that they're going to get to go to like their first choice of schools, and that the enrollment process is going to help them. They're going to guide them through this process, which just has not shown to be true. We've been calling parents and students. Some of them still have not gotten their placement. Some of them got their third choice placement, a placement that they didn't choose at all. And there's just a lot of concern regarding to what is going to happen to these students. First, because there is no other school that is very close. The closest one is about 2 miles away at Markham, which currently has not accepted any of our students, as far as we can tell. There's no transportation being provided by Ousd for these kids. A lot of these parents don't have cars and they rely on being able to walk kids to school or having older siblings walk their younger siblings to school. And so we've heard a lot of concerns as well that K-8 schools don't really exist anymore. And so they're going to have to deal with that issue. In addition to that, there's just a lot of social issues in regards to just transferring, my cat, in terms of transferring students. It's not as easy as just saying like, we're going to transfer this group of students to another school. Within a week, everything will be fine. They'll make new friends. They'll get to know their teachers. It's a lot more complicated than that. These kids have been through a lot of different traumatic experiences. It takes a long time to rebuild that trust with each other, with their with other students, with staff members, and they've been together for such a long time. It's a K-8 school. Some of them have been together back when there was a TK as well, and so they've been together for 10 years at this point. It's the first school that I've been at where most of these kids are like family members related in some way. Everyone has at least a cousin, 2 cousins at the school. And so they're literally breaking apart families right now by just kind of sending these kids everywhere. So after kind of the reaction to the closure news, one thing that was really positive though was that there was this huge wave of community support. So we had thousands of people attending board meetings for the first time, which I had never seen before. We had a march throughout East Oakland, which attracted hundreds of people as well. Town halls started appearing in person where people would go to schools and organize around like how to fight against the district. Where I am going to make a plug, we do have a Parker Town Hall on Monday at 5:30. Everyone's invited to attend. And really, the most positive thing I think that came about this was that we have these new organizers starting to appear now. People who had not been political before are starting to realize, I think everyone had always had this inclination that like, oh, USD is a bad employer, oh, USD sucks, like, oh, USD is not going to help you. But going to these board meetings and actually hearing what people are saying and realizing like, these are not just like bad employers, these are just bad people in general. They want to take your schools from you. We also started seeing a lot of this working class solidarity appear as well, not just with ILWU, which is continuing to work with OEA teachers and how to kind of do combined efforts against these privatization situations, but also with other schools. So we had Berkeley schools coming out, Richmond schools, even in the South Bay, teachers unions were kind of rallying together in support. And so what's kind of coming very clear with all of this is that it's not really about the money. It's obviously not about providing extra resources for these kids as well. They don't give anyone a straight answer when we ask them, what resources are you going to give these children if they transfer schools? There's no answer to like, how are you keeping track of where these kids are going and how they're doing? They won't even tell us where kids are going to go so that we can't follow these kids as well. And it's really becoming clear that this is about property in general. It's about the fact that like all of these school closures are happening in like pretty high property value areas. It's also just the taking of public land in general and like selling them off to private developers. Gary Yee was actually at Community Day a couple of weeks ago with some developers looking at the property. Yeah, but it wasn't even the end of the school year. That school is still open right now. There's no reason that they should be looking at that land. We got told by someone as well that there's a charter chain that might want to take our school if their kind of co-location requests get denied, which is also just ridiculous. If you think about it, like you're going to replace our school with another school because you think that the kids at our school just don't deserve to go to the school that's in their neighborhood. And they keep talking about kind of, oh, we need to close schools to make these community schools, to make better, stronger, thriving community schools, without kind of looking at what is a community school, really. Our school is a school where neighborhood kids walk to the school. Generations of their families have gone to the school, like grandparents have gone to the school, parents and aunts and uncles, and they form this community with each other. It's just not the kind of community that OUSD wants to see. So we're still fighting for sure. It's definitely gotten much more complicated given that like right now board has already voted. There are some amendments to kind of delay this. The union is also going through a legal action to try to also delay the school closure. But so far we're still slated to close at the end of the year. But yeah, we're still organizing. We need people to come out and just support in any way they can. Also open to any suggestions that people have as well, because yeah, it is definitely a lot of new people trying to like fight against this.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Next, we'll go to our third and final speaker, Mike Hutchinson, and after that, we'll enter the discussion and question and answer period. So over to you, Michael Hutchinson.
Got to unmute. Sure done.
Mike, we can't hear you. Please unmute. There you see you now.
I think I'm here now. Can you hear me?
Great, great.
Okay. Ooh, sorry about that. I should have been a little more prepared there. So I'm Mike Hutchinson, lifelong Oakland resident, proud graduate of OUSD, and now school board director in District 5 in Oakland. So I think where I want to start is, For over 20 years, I worked with youth directly in Oakland and in Berkeley until 2012, when we had our mass school closures here in Oakland. 2 of those 5 schools that were closed, Maxwell Park Elementary and Santa Fe Elementary, were schools that I had worked at for 10 years. And in the process that year of us organizing to try to fight against those closures, I was fired from my job and escorted off campus. And it really forced me to decide to take a new direction with my work. And kind of since then, I have been organizing for public education, but more directly organizing to fight against school closures, especially here in Oakland, but also statewide and nationally. And one of the things that I think we need to understand is, since 2012 in Oakland, depending on how you count, at most there have been 2 schools closed over the last 10 years. So what we have not had in Oakland is a series of closures year after year, because we've been fighting against that. But what we've had is this constant threat, this constant cloud that's been over us, where every year there's more schools under threat. But I want to state very clearly that we have a very good track record since 2012 in fighting against school closures. And for me, this is the issue that I ran for school board on. It was my top issue, to end school closures here in Oakland. And with that campaign, I explicitly ran on the platform and got endorsements from a wide variety of people and groups. And that's why I worked so hard to make sure I was getting the endorsement of the Democratic Party and getting the endorsement of State Superintendent Tony Thurmond, or former County Superintendent Sheila Jordan, because I knew that this fight was on deck for when I got onto the school board. And so we've actually been really successful in the year and a month that I've been on the school board in fighting off this plan, because we knew what was coming. So just a couple of things for context. Over the last 15 months, the number of charter schools in Oakland has gone down by over 10%. The number of students enrolled in charter schools in Oakland has gone down by over 10%. We have a new strategic plan for the next 3 years that has no mention of charter schools in it, and no mention of school closures, the citywide plan, or the blueprint, because I worked directly with Superintendent Johnson Trammell to make sure we scrubbed the new strategic plan of any of that language. We also have a new master's facilities plan where we've redone the inventory of our facilities across Oakland and threw out the old work done by the consultants Jacobs out of Texas that we spent $2.4 million on. So I've been able to scrub a lot of the almost foundational documents through the district to set up for this fight. Then in October, on October 27th, we were able to outmaneuver these other school board directors because they really don't understand what they're doing. And by a vote of 4-3, we ended cohort 3, which effectively ended the blueprint and ended school closures in Oakland in Ousd. And that was all done on October 27th. But what it did is, of course, it produced a series of pushbacks. So the first pushback came November 8th, when Karen Monroe, the Alameda County Superintendent, sent Ousd a letter of a lack of going concern, where out of the blue, she decided that she had a concern over Ousd's budget 2 years from now. And because of that made-up concern, she threatened reimposing FCMAT and withholding compensation from the superintendent. The school board's response to that lack of going concern letter was to unanimously vote to appeal that decision, because there is nobody within Ousd who agreed with Karen Monroe's determination. And so we did that. We appealed to the state, but there's not really a real process to appeal. It was us trying to use the language of the law, and Tony Thurmond denied that appeal. But I want to be real explicit. Nothing else has happened because of that. That was a threat by Karen Monroe, and nothing has been implemented. FCMAT is not in charge of our district. Nobody is directing us on what to do. Then the next thing that happened was in December, there was a new resolution introduced as a new legislative item, which is the process we have now to just kind of tee up legislation. And that was co-authored by Gary Yee and Shanti Gonzalez. And it called for a new batch of school closures. For our school board in Oakland, every year at the first school board meeting in January, we vote on who the board president and vice president, the leadership of the board, is going to be for that year. So on January 3rd, we had that meeting. That vote came down to a vote between myself and Gary Yee for board president. We all knew, all 7 of the board members knew that this new legislative item was teed up, and that if Gary Yee was elected president of the board, the first thing he was going to do was introduce and agendize this resolution. By a vote of 5-2 on January 3rd, Gary Yee was elected board president. On January 12th, at his first meeting as board president, there was a new resolution agendized and passed that directed Superintendent Johnson Trammell to create a list of schools to be closed at the end of this school year and at the end of next school year. That was the start of this plan, that January 12th vote. Up until that point, there was no list that existed. The district was not working on closing schools. And I want to be real clear with everyone, especially here, this is not the superintendent's plan. The superintendent doesn't want this plan. This is by school board resolution by 5 school board directors. And so that passed on January 12th by a vote of 5-2. Then board president Gary Yee scheduled a series of 4 special meetings. The special meeting on January 31st was the official release of the list of schools to be closed. That was the Zoom meeting where we had 2,000 people on that Zoom call. Then there was another special meeting scheduled February 8th for the final vote on these closures. And again, 2,000 people were on that Zoom call. And if you watched, you saw school board directors introduce amendments at the last minute, putting schools on the list, taking schools off the list. You saw how haphazardly this was thrown together. And you also saw that this is being done explicitly by those same 5 school board directors. That's where this comes from. And when they approved that at 1 a.m. on a Zoom call on February 8th, that's what set in motion this plan. And so now we stand with 3 schools set to be closed at the end of this school year, and the rest of the list to be closed at the end of next school year. But I want to also be clear about a couple of other things, because there's been narratives that have been thrown out there to try to justify what's going on, and none of them are true. So first, OUSD is not in financial crisis, and we haven't been in financial crisis. But at the end of the last school year, for 2021, we ended the year with a $50 million yearly budget surplus. And we started this school year with over $51 million in our reserves. That does not include the over $100 million we have left in COVID relief funding. We just had our second interim report for this year's budget, and it shows actually that we're projected for a surplus now on every year of our multi-year projection. These numbers are our official budget numbers, and they were also just certified by an outside audit. So again, we are not in financial crisis. So there is nothing that's happened over the last 2 months to justify all of a sudden we need to close schools. We also do not have declining enrollment in OUSD. From 2012-13 to 2019-20, enrollment in OUSD went down by 258 students. 258 students over 7 years is not declining enrollment. That is flat enrollment. But we've had an enrollment dip the 2 years of the pandemic like every other school district across California. And if you actually look at the numbers in Oakland, charter schools have seen double to 3 times the enrollment dip that our public schools have seen. But most importantly, this school closure plan is not being directed by somebody on the outside and forced on us. FCMAT is not forcing us to close schools. The county or the state is not forcing us to close schools. Again, this is a resolution that comes from our school board directors. That is who was trying to close our schools, and it's actually who's always been trying to close our schools. This has always been a plan that's been done to us by our own people who are democratically elected right here in Oakland. And that is what we need to continue fighting against. But things are different now. So I think it makes a big difference for everything that I'm on the school board. So I was able to release the list 3 days early, which helped with this fight. It's also been very important in terms of the political leadership around Oakland and to see how people are weighing in. So once this was announced, for the first time now, we also have a resolution from the city council opposing this school closure plan. We have a resolution from the Alameda County Board of Education opposing this plan. Mia Bonta introduced legislation to correct her husband's original legislation. And we've even just this past week, the Alameda County Democratic Party Central Committee voted to oppose this school closure plan. And so we've been able to line, and of course the community opposes it. Of course we have faith leaders weighing in opposing it. Of course labor is opposing it. And so it now stands where just about the only people in Oakland who are in favor of the school closure plan are the 5 school board directors who created it and approved it. And again, this does not come from the superintendent. I've been getting regular calls from senior staff because they are furious and depressed that they're being directed to implement the policy of the school board. And this is also why we need to continue the job that we started in 2020 when we made real changes in our local leadership in Oakland and finish the job by running out the last 3 of these incumbents. In 2020, the 4 incumbents on the school board did not run for re-election because we drove them out of office. The other 3, Gary, Amy Ng, and Shanti Gonzalez, are not running for re-election. And so we will have in one election cycle driven all 7 incumbents out of office for these very policy decisions. And so when we're looking at how to fight against this and what we're organizing against, we have to understand that we will have a new school board sworn in January of 23. That will be the end of this once and for all. But we have this real issue now over the next 10 months of there's going to be real damage done. And how can we limit this damage, both from the school slated for closure next year, because there starts to be this closure year that starts to chip away at the school, but also we have to set up the first line of defense around Parker, the middle school at La Escuelita, and Community Day, because they are under real threat of being closed in 2 months. And so that's the fight that we all need to engage in. I want to really encourage everyone to keep the school board as the target. They have always been the ones who make the decision over this. And again, as a sitting school board director, I can tell you for a fact, the school board is not being directed by anyone to do this. This comes from the school board. There is no financial crisis. This is not justified. I know it's hard for us to get our heads around it, but this is just because we have evil school board directors who have always wanted to close our schools. And that needs to be what we finally take care of once and for all. So I can end it there, and whatever questions I'm available to answer.
Thank you so much, Mike and Jack and Hillary. So for the discussion period, for anyone who has a comment or a question, please keep it under 2 minutes. And if you can use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen under the reactions button, that will be the easiest way where we can keep track of the stack. And I already see one hand raised. Orlando, go ahead and unmute yourself and let's hear your comment.
Hey, Mike, how you doing? One part question. What is one of the steps that we can get involved into one of the process to move forward for those who really don't understand the whole language? How can we fit into one part to help support what you're talking about?
Well, I think I can hand this one. I know Hillary mentioned a real direct way for everyone to get involved. She is at one of the schools that is the first, they're the first ones in the line of fire. So it's getting directly involved with the schools that are directly under threat. The other thing that I just really want to stress is we've done a much better job than in the past of getting the information out, but still not enough of the community knows what's really happening and the timeline that we're working on. And so we still really need to get people involved and engaged, but hopefully with the information that this is unjustified. But if we stand up, we can prevent this from happening. But I also want to give Hillary a chance to give some direct ways to get involved too.
Yeah, I mentioned before, we have a town hall meeting at Parker tomorrow at 5:30 p.m., which is where we kind of directly plan actions to do. If you can't make it, there's always ways to get involved. There's always things for people to do, whether it's canvassing, flyering. But yeah, getting information out is key, especially the people not impacted, and kind of, it's not just about your kid's school or the fact that you have a kid out of school. It connects to like this privatization in general of Oakland.
Okay, could you put like an email or a website so we can stay in contact for those who want to get involved?
Yeah, I'll put my email, and I'll also put like a website that has events by date that you can get involved in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Jack, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add, but otherwise we'll keep going down the stack. Next up is Michael and Jan. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi. I just want to say a couple things about, I think it's really important, the point that Mike Hutchinson made about we have an opportunity to elect people again to the school board. The other districts that were not up last time are now going to be up this year. And I would encourage people to pay attention to the question of who's running. I also want to publicize sort of Action 2020, which ran, was very active in terms of fighting against the existing school board last year and endorse some candidates and so on, is going to reactivate soon. And people who are not on the Action 2020 list can contact me, and I will send out the meeting date for the reactivation of Action 2020 when it comes up. And this last thing I want to say is I want to plug our friend Marco Amaral, who's running for the superintendent of public instruction in the state. He is running. He's currently on a school board in San Diego County, and he is 100% opposed to school closures, and 100% willing to blame the Democrats who run the state, from the executive and legislative branches, for this mess and their failure to do anything about it. And I would encourage people to go to Marco Amaral's website and look at his program, and if you're inclined, donate some money. Over.
Okay, thanks for that comment. Speakers, feel free to jump in if you want to react to that. Otherwise, we can keep going down the list. Next up is Vicente, Oakland Greens.
Thank you very much. Vicente Cruz, Oakland Greens Event and Fundraising Coordinator. And I'm also going to read from the question that came before all of us. Is there any judicial intervention that could delay the closures until the seating of the new school board? And then my question actually is probably directly for Mike. It took us so long just to get you elected, to have all the support that finally did get you elected over those years. Is there any advice you can give to the people here on how, when the new election comes up, when we find an actual candidate that's going to be people before profit, like yourself, how can we really support them so it doesn't take as long to have a more progressive school board? Over.
I'll just try to jump in and answer real quick. So there's always a way that we could try to get an injunction, you know, in my thinking, and I'm not a lawyer, but if we can get an injunction, especially a 180-day injunction, that takes us into next school year, and we're gonna be good. My understanding of OEA's PERV complaint is even in a best case scenario where it's a favorable ruling, it's going to take months to go through this process. And so I have a lack of faith about a legal strategy, only because in the past, I've always heard this talk. It's never quite materialized, and you know the clock is ticking. And so, if anyone wants to launch a lawsuit or a legal strategy, please do it. We need that. In terms of the elections, things are actually going really well in the larger fight. You know, the day after the school board vote on February 8th, the following day on February 9th, there was a press conference at City Hall that I was invited to. And Vincente, this is especially for you. So I show up at the press conference I was invited. It was put on by Councilmember Shang Thao, who is running for mayor now. Mia Bonta was there to introduce her new legislation, Rebecca Kaplan, Carol Fife, and Nikki Bass. Rebecca Kaplan couldn't stand close enough to me. I was their favorite person all of a sudden the day after the vote. And it was surreal standing there behind Mia Bonta, front and center on the steps of City Hall, the day after the closure vote, as like their favorite person. And so in a lot of ways, we've already won this fight. It's not like it was in 2012 where we get called crazy all the time. Everyone is basically on our side here. But I also don't have a lot of faith in the quality of candidates that will be produced. We all know this has been an ongoing problem. I think by just getting these old board members off, Gary, Shanti, and Amy, that will be the job, and that's what we need done. And there's a pathway cleared. And the other thing is the announcements are going to start coming soon now because redistricting has been done. I've now been redistricted into District 4. So I'm running for school board in District 4 this year, which allows me to kind of frame it citywide again. And if I'm elected in District 4, then the way it works is the new school board in January, when I'm sworn in, I'll resign from District 5 and the new school board will have a vote for my replacement in District 5. So as long as we win 2 out of these 3 seats, we get District 4 and District 5 in a 2-for-1. So it's about to be on this year because it's on the Hunger Games in Oakland with all these seats up.
Oh, I also just want to jump in about the legal thing. So in terms of OEA's PERB, it did get expedited. And so we are expecting to hear back in April. CTA lawyers are pretty positive. I don't know, I don't trust lawyers. So they seem to suggest that we will get another year for the schools that are currently slated for closure at the end of the year, but we won't know until April.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for those responses. Next on the list is Craig, followed by Josh. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, I wanted to speak to what Mike has said about school board, it being the school board. I mean, as Mike knows, I mean, I've definitely been in favor of getting better school board members on. I think I was there for Mike's 2 previous runs and the most recent one. I'm really glad he got on and it's made a difference. So that's important. OEA has also been, and I participated in, in helping get other members on the school board, people like Jody London. Oops, that didn't work out so well. Shanti Gonzalez, and she didn't get money from, and even, I don't think Jody London initially didn't get money from billionaires that we didn't know that, so some other forces are behind them. And then of course there was Sam Davis. Now we got Van Cedric Williams on the board. And I don't think, at first he was also being pulled in some dubious directions. I think, he's definitely come around. He's much more solid now. I think Mike's presence and his steadfastness has helped encourage him. And, so that's good, but there's much more to it. And I think we're going to be under illusions if we think it's only about supporting better school board members. This is clearly, as Jack's presentation and Hillary's highlighted, there's major political and economic forces that are driving this and have been driving it for decades, the school closures. And the Democrats have been front and center in promoting charters and privatization and standardized testing, and everything is destroying public schools. So I think we need to be very careful of that. So we need to be actually, putting our eggs in a lot of other baskets and fighting on multiple levels, organizing direct actions. We're going to need to strike. We're going to need to unite with the port, the longshore workers who are fighting privatization at the port. And I'll finish up because I know, we want to keep our comments brief, but there will be a meeting. By the way, I put the link to the flyer for the town hall at Parker in the chat, but there's also a meeting at ILW local 10 in San Francisco on Wednesday. I could put the information there. It's not on Zoom. You may go on Cluster 7's website and they say Zoom, but it's not on Zoom. But that's important. They're joining with us because we're fighting the same forces that are pushing for gentrification and privatization of land and in Oakland that is driving school closures. So we have to really not think that Mia Bonta, who, by the way, this is the last thing, I saw Mia Bonta speak at some of these events, and she practically apologizes for the school board members who, as she says, had to do this. She's sad, and we have to fix the problem with the debt, and she's going to try to push legislation. Her legislation is meant to fix that, but we're going to have to find on multiple levels to really stop this.
So can I jump in now? It's Jack.
Great, go ahead, Jack.
Sure. So, yeah, I agree with what Craig said, but I also want to bring up something. Mike said that it's always been about the school board and only about the school board. Well, from 2003 to 2009, the school board had no power. And that's when the damage was really inflicted. From 2003 to 2006, charter school enrollment went up from 2,031 to over 8,100. It was quadrupled at that time. That's when a number of schools were closed. So, and that was not done by the school board. That was done by one Randolph Ward. Many of those votes were 1-0, because he had the power to do that. I was at almost all those school board meetings. Secondly, it wasn't just about Oakland. This was going on, these school closures all over the country in large urbans. So there are forces going on, economic and political forces, that have to be taken into account. Now, I agree that these are bad people, these school board people. They are also interacting with and involved with and interlocking with bad forces. Some of the people you mentioned, I know Sheila Jordan real well. I've known her for 50 years. But when Sheila Jordan was Alameda County Superintendent of Public Instruction, well, she was the person who first introduced Randolph Ward to the school board members when he was, being groomed for superintendent of state administrator of Oakland schools. So I don't believe it's just about that. In terms of, it's also, as Hillary pointed out, real estate, the developers coming in the enabling legislation for taking over the Oakland School District, SB 39, that was written by Don Parada, the state senator from Oakland, who at the time was the president pro tem of the state Senate. Parada made sure that he included that parcel with 5 schools. And the developers went after it very heavily, and Broad was involved in trying to give it to them. Eli Broad himself was one of the country's largest, and California's largest or second largest real estate developer, and closed schools in LA and put up schools in LA in certain areas to enhance his holdings. These things are all, tied together. So yes, I think it's really important to elect the school board members, as Mike says, but I think, as Craig says, we have to look further than simply saying that it's all about the school board. I don't believe, that it's all about the school board. I believe that there are other forces involved, and we better watch out that we don't get, other Shanti Gonzalez is elected.
Thanks, Jack. Mike or Hillary, feel free to jump in if you want to comment on that one right now. There's someone wrote in the chat, Naomi Katz wrote in the chat, question maybe related. Why did Karen Monroe, county superintendent, try to undermine things? How can it be just the 5 school board members when Monroe jumped in out of nowhere? So there's a question on the table.
Yeah. One of the things folks got to understand, and I'm sorry, I'm on the school board. So there is no invisible hand that put this plan together and made it happen. This happens because of school board votes. So Karen Monroe can say and do whatever she wants. That's not what's driving this. And Karen Monroe, just like other folks, misplayed her hand and hasn't realized the changes that we've made in Oakland already. And that's why there's been this extreme pushback. And that's why Karen Monroe is not going to be reelected in June because of these decisions. And so, but of course, there's things that are connected. I had Michael Bloomberg spend money directly in my elections, but the school board has the authority now, like we didn't have in 2003 to 2009. And we have a democratically elected school board. Chicago does not have a democratically elected school board. That's why they're at the mercy of mayoral appointees, but that's not the case here. And I serve on a school board where none of the other 6 school board directors endorsed me, and I didn't endorse any of them. And so none of these votes have surprised me at all. But we need to look at what's really happening and where we stand. We are not in financial crisis, y'all. We're sitting with over $50 million in our reserves. That's never been the case in OUSD before. It's unjustified, and there's no reason behind it. So we don't need to argue about where it's coming from. We need to stand up and fight. And for some of y'all, we've been in this fight together for a long time. I'm telling you how different it is now, how much farther along we are. And we're close to that final victory. January of 2023, we are going to have a new school board being sworn in, and we're going to have the state loan completely paid off, because I've already passed a resolution to pay for the second loan early. We will be completely free in January of 23. That's the timeline that we're looking at and that we need to jump on board with. This is not woe is me, we can't do anything. We are close to the final victory, y'all. And I need y'all to see that this is a flimsy school closure plan that came from Shanti and Gary, that directed the superintendent to create a list of schools to be closed out of thin air with no direction. And that's why the list looks like this. You can't just go and sell our property to developers. There's laws that protect us. And actually, after 8 years, we just won the battle, which is the reason why the administration building was flooded originally. And we all know how long people have been trying to get that property from us. We just won that fight. We are winning, you all. That's what we need to jump on board with and finish off this job. And as a sitting school board director, I can now say that I know these things as a fact of whether there's an invisible hand controlling things or not, or whether this is the superintendent's plan or not. That's why I thought everyone helped to get me elected, so I can give you this information. And so we can see these things and we can push this through for the final victory. And if we don't mess up, we can end this once and for all over the next 10 months.
Okay, next on stack, we have Josh Beth. Go ahead and unmute and let's hear your comment.
Hey, greetings. I'm sorry that I tuned in late. I was not on up to date with the time change. So I started, if my question's already been answered, forgive me. So I have a few questions. One is, and I'm a District 6 parent, by the way. One is when Shanti Gonzalez says, well, this is inevitable because previous administrations voted in so many charter schools. Is there not an element of truth in that when she's saying we just have too many schools now to be supported by this district? Is there not an element of truth that the district got itself into this situation by okaying all these charter schools all these decades up until now? So that's question number one. So you're nodding, Mike, so I'm ready to hear. And then number two, and I raised this question at a school board meeting, I am just shocked and appalled when I look at the salaries of all their admin staff, and they have a heavy admin staff. I mean, and all these people are making like $250,000, like crazy salaries. And why is it that we don't ever see when they talk about cuts, they don't ever talk about cutting admin, or do they? And is there any way that those salaries can be renegotiated? Because if you cut those salaries in half, all those people would still be making damn good money for the jobs that they're doing. And, you know, we could easily save a couple $1 million. So why is that never on the table? And then my third point was just a comment that I was actually, and I'm a lifelong Green Party member, although I have not been active. I was actually disappointed to see the Green Party not support Christina Molina when she ran in District 7. I thought she was a really strong candidate, and I think she would have voted in the right direction as compared to Clifford Thompson, who I can't remember if that was who the Greens supported, but he has not turned out to be. No? Okay. Anyway, I think it's important to have people on the board who are actually parents with kids in the district. I think it makes for a really different level of personal investment and perspective. So feel free to jump in and answer my questions. Thank you.
I just want to say, we're not in financial crisis.
Okay.
So even if I would say that everything that you just listed there was true, we're not in financial crisis. There is no financial imperative that's driving us to close schools. We have over $50 million in our reserve. We're running a yearly budget surplus every year. And I hate to say this to everyone, but if you cut salaries by half, by 50%, then we will not have any employees, because then you go to a neighboring district and you get the same job for more money and less hassle. And that's a real issue. And so we're actually under capacity. But that's not what the issue is here. We have a budget surplus. And so when Shanti flaps her gums, what people need to say is, please show me the official budget numbers, which is what I cite off the top of my head. They can say whatever they want. She's been saying that for 7 years and she's been wrong. And I can tell you what Shanti ran an Anyone But Mike campaign in 2020. She was hosting house parties for all of my opponents, anyone but me, for this very reason. So I don't know why people listen to anyone and what they think. The official documents and numbers are accessible and they're addressed at just about every meeting. So we're not in financial crisis. So that's the wrong comparison. The question is, why are they closing our schools like this? If we were in financial crisis, this would have been done over 6 months and prepared for it. We just made $40 million of budget adjustments at the end of January to take care of any question for our budget. Those did not include any school closures because we don't have to close schools. You don't see Lisa Grant Dawson, our senior business officer, saying we need to do this. She's calling me furious because this makes her look bad and they're trying to throw her under the bus too. So Shanti is the problem, who's always wanted to close our schools. So I would welcome a chance to debate Shanti in public. Shanti was also the board president for a year. So if that's true, why didn't she do anything to fix the situation?
So when she says our schools are under-resourced, which is true, and she says we don't have money for all these repairs that need to be made, I mean, that's all BS?
Wait,
They're sitting on all this money?
Wait. But you can't jump around like that. That's a different issue. So our schools not having enough resources is not the same as we need to close our schools. And this is the problem that we have. We have had a mismanagement problem. And you know who we blame for that? Somebody who's been sitting on the school board for almost 8 years. So if she couldn't figure out how to do a better job in all of this time, she needs to go. I don't know why, honestly, I don't know why people listen to her. Like we received $280 million in COVID relief, over that amount. So what is anyone talking about? We don't have resources to fund something. It's just not true. And everyone needs to demand that folks show them an official document or numbers. Like this stuff is posted on the district website. We don't need to guess at this. And why you would, you know, I'm a sitting school board member just like her. I'm on the Budget and Finance Committee, and I always post the documents that I reference. So it's up to the community to choose who they think is a reliable source. I mean, I can't argue for, you know, a negative. Like that's jumping around. So if you're gonna say, if it's always gonna be, well, what about this? What about this? Yes, our district has been mismanaged. Yes, we need more resources at our school sites. But no, none of that leads to we close schools, especially close schools like this in a 3-week process. This is unheard of because it comes from Gary and Shanti. So of course they're not make up an excuse to try to justify it.
All right, thank you. I'm going to read a couple of comments that came through the chat, and then Naomi Katz, you'll be up. In the chat, Craig posted, and OUSD spends a far higher percentage of its budget on private contractors and consultants than any other district in the state. Clifford Thompson was supported by Go Public Schools charter backers. And Deidre Snyder wrote, Fremont, with the same number of students, has half as many administrators in the central office. If we pared it down to an equal number, we'd save $4 million a year. And Craig Gordon posted a link to an article. And then Greg Jan wrote, the Green Party's position on District 7 in 2020 was vote for Ben Tapscott and do not vote for Clifford Thompson. So just to clarify that. And then finally, Deidre wrote again, we could take money from the fired administrators and start putting it into the schools. On another note, the lack of resources in schools and support for kids who need extra help is part of what causes the flight of students from schools like Parker and Sankofa. And Naomi, over to you. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. So I'm a special ed educator in the district. And I appreciate what all the panelists have been saying, but I do question every time Superintendent Hyla comes out with a new announcement to the OUSD community, and maybe it's only the staff, she's always waiving the fact that they have to also think about how they're going to increase compensation for their labor partners, mainly their teachers and staff. And so is that 50 million surplus that we have taking into account? I mean, I think it's really an excuse that she's positing that we have to choose between closing schools or increasing and making teachers' salaries competitive with the rest of the Bay Area. But is that true, Mike, that 50 million, there's none of that that's being earmarked for teacher salary increases?
It's two separate things. Yes, we need to figure out ways to raise compensation, but we're sitting on fat reserves, and this plan to close schools does not come from Kyla. This comes from the school board. And so those two things are not connected in that sort of way. But yes, we're in the process of trying to figure out how to raise compensation, just like we're in the process of reprioritizing our budget. But that's not connected to school closures. And see, what I hear people doing now, I'm just gonna say it explicitly, you all are giving them the reasons for why you think it's okay that they are talking about closing schools. We are not in financial crisis, period. I don't know why folks are thinking, well, maybe the reserve is this or maybe the reserve is that. We've never had a $50 million reserve. So it's obscene to talk about school closures when we're sitting on resources like that. And these are the official budget numbers.
And I'm telling what Kyla's putting out there in her letters, that she's always linking those two things.
No, so I don't want to speak for what somebody else is saying, but I just know where this is coming from, and we're not in financial crisis. So I can't explain other people's words. I'm trying to give you the information. And so this isn't something we need to think why they're doing it. We know the information and we know it's not justified.
I also just want to put a couple things into perspective. Like one, we bargain with OUSD every 2 years, every 4 years, depending on the contract. They're not looking to give teachers a raise. That's not the reason why they're closing schools. There was also a meeting between some La Escuelita parents with some board members where they asked for numbers, like actual numbers. How much are you saving by closing these schools? When they closed La Escuelita, the 6 to 8, they're saving $33,000 is the number they got. Closing Parker, they're saving like $230,000. Closing Community Day, they're saving like $230,000. These closures are not for raises. They're also claiming like, oh, we're going to fire like 100 plus classified staff and we'll give teachers like a 1% raise. I think there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to raises, especially when it comes to like solidarity with your fellow workers and with the families that you're working with. We shouldn't be fighting with each other for these resources to get more money. It needs to be coming from the top. And aside from that, like raises is one thing. Like I would love to get paid more. We also have to look at what else affects teacher retention, which is smaller class sizes. It's hard for a lot of new teachers to teach a full class load, especially in Oakland when you're not getting that much support.
Yeah, can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
If there's really a $50 million surplus and it's ongoing, you can sustain it or something at approximately that level, then you can plan for how you're not going to close schools and how you're going to give compensation raises to teachers, and you're going to provide more resources and so on. That's something that requires planning. It's not something to put a figure out. I think Mike said the board is working on something like that now in his last remarks. I'm not sure he said that. But in any event, there's a relationship in money for the district, but it also depends on what pots the money is in and so on. But, you know, you have compensation needs to be increased for Oakland teachers. The money going into schools needs to be increased. You need more resources for the schools, and you need to keep schools open. And all those three things are priorities, and they shouldn't be competing with one another. And if there really is this much of a surplus, then I guess they won't be.
Okay, I'll do a time check. We're at 6:27 and we started a few minutes late, so we can run just a few over 6:30. But
excuse me, I've had my hand up and I've put stack in the chat.
Exactly. What I was going to say was, Gerald Smith, you're next, and because we haven't heard from you yet, and then we'll go to Josh Beth, and then we'll turn it back over to our speakers to do a final wrap up. Gerald, go ahead.
I actually agree with Mike that they got plenty of money. We know that the state has a surplus, a budget surplus. The governor said, what, 30 billion or more. So there's no question. I would agree with Mike that the money is not really what's going on here. Okay. I tend to think that, you know, this is where we do have a difference of opinion. And that is, this entire thing was started off by the Democratic Party. Broad is a Democratic Party, a member of the Democratic Party, so is Bill Gates. Okay, so this idea that these people are just neutral, no, they are not neutral at all. They are our enemies. They are our declared enemies in terms of basically denying our children a decent education. So California is a deep blue state. The Democratic Party has a supermajority in the state legislature, and the Democratic, we have a Democratic Party governor. California, as I just stated, has a surplus in terms of its budget. Considering these facts, as workers, we must draw the conclusion that the Democrats are for the public school closures. I think that's a fact. For instance, when Bonta wrote a bill trying to mitigate some of the effects of Proposition 39, the newly elected Buffy Wicks chopped that bill apart and amended it to turn it into its opposite. So look, Democrats are not our friends on this. And we don't need to, I think, confuse ourselves. This whole charter school thing, in fact, Obama said on television that he was for charters because that's a little competition, he said. Well, actually, it's hurting the public schools. And the Democrats, in fact, are part of the problem. Finish.
Thank you, Gerald. Josh, Beth, let's hear from you, and then we'll turn it back over to our panelists for the last word.
Agree with Gerald completely, for the record. Question, if we are indeed sitting on this surplus, why, call me naive, why does McClymonds still have lead in its water? Ben Tapscott is there at every meeting saying we still have lead in them. Why are our facilities not being fixed? Why are our class sizes not being reduced? If we're sitting on this money, why isn't it being used where it most needs to be?
Jack or Hillary or Mike, any one of you want to? Because of the failed school board that we're trying to get rid of. And it's not an if about our reserves. I encourage everyone to watch the video of the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting just this last week, where we thoroughly discussed the second interim report. So the budget numbers, I tell you, there's no if. These are the official budget numbers and what we have. And so the questions of mismanagement, that's why we've been trying to make these changes for so long. And I'm real proud about McClymonds right now, because for the first time, finally, McClymonds project has started. We've started the clock, and in 3 years, 4 years at the most, there's going to be a brand new school built there out of Measure Y funds. But yeah, that's why we drove this last school board out of there, because Jamoke Hinton Hodge was intentionally destroying McClymonds High. So, I mean, so there's not an if for our budget dollars, and for these, we know the official numbers. The people who have fiduciary responsibility in the district are the 7 school board members, and within that, I'm one of the 3 members on the Budget and Finance Committee. So I encourage everyone to look into that. And then the question of how our dollars are prioritized or used or resourced, that is the question that needs to be directed towards the school board, who has the authority to make those decisions. And yes, I serve on a school board where I don't have a lot of respect for the other school board directors. So that is the work that still needs to be done.
Yeah, if I can add, I think the why part, I've stopped kind of questioning like why people make these really horrible decisions that don't benefit children or parents or teachers. And also just, yeah, why is the district so mismanaged? I think there are many reasons, and it is what it is. I think what the focus on is now, like, well, how do we change that? How can we make sure that, one, people know about this, which I think is the main reason for why OUSD has remained mismanaged and such a broken system for so long, is because, yeah, these are things that people have kind of just taken as the norm. We had to figure out, like, yeah, we have this money, why isn't it reaching, or how can we get it to reach our school sites?
And Jack, did you have any final words?
Sure. So a couple of things. One is that the issues are connected. The issues of where money goes are connected. It can't be that, we're discussing this pile, but not that pile. If you have a certain amount of money, unless you have some that's siloed so that you can't use it for other things. You can only use it to keep schools open. You can only use it for teacher salary. Otherwise, you have to throw it all in, and you want to get the best school district you can, which, as I said before, you want to start compensating teachers decently, because Oakland teachers have been underpaid for decades, badly underpaid. And you want to put money into the schools. When I taught at Castlemont, the repairs that were needed at that school were unbelievable. It was disgraceful that students had to go to, to that school. The teachers had to teach in that school, and clericals, food service workers had to work there. And the third is that you want to keep schools open so that you have, as Hillary said, neighborhood schools where students can walk to schools, and which have been anchors for years of the community. I also think Gerald is right about the Democratic Party, but we should recognize that the Democrats, first, there have been certain shifts in their priorities, which make more money available because of the need to do something about rebuilding infrastructure in this country. A lot of that is rhetorical, but if the entire country falls apart, it falls apart under them. So there is, something of a shift. There's also been a shift in the attitude nationally as well as locally towards charter schools. And so there's been, they've peaked and it's coming down some. And I think that that and the community fight has been largely responsible, for the fact that one is that school closures, have peaked, but two is that you have a split in among the Democrats in this city, which is affecting a potential split in the state. We have the city council, which is now saying we're against school closures. I'm a real opponent of the Democratic Party, but I also think that realistically, when you see Fisher, you want to push on it as hard as you can. And that's something that ought to be pushed on, because at the top level with Newsom and with the legislature, they have not been friends. So if you have contradictions among them, I think you want to push on them, and I do see those. But I think in the main point, in terms of what is done on the ground, you do want to try to get the best school board elected that you can, and one that you can have confidence in is going to act in the interests of the people of the city and the students and community.